Welcome to a place where silence turns into fire, where what feels forbidden transforms into a love too deep to deny. Here, stories aren't polished fairy tales, they are raw confessions of the heart, spoken from the edge of restraint and the depths of passion. You'll hear of stolen glances that linger too long, of nights that break down years of loneliness, of touches that awaken desire thought lost forever. These are stories where every kiss feels like both sin and salvation, where age and judgment fade into shadows, and only the truth of love remains. If you've ever felt the quiet ache of longing, the dangerous pull of connection, or the miracle of being truly seen, you'll find yourself here. Stay, listen, and feel the kind of love that doesn't follow rules, because real love never does. It began so quietly that even the heart tried to pretend it wasn't happening. At first, it was nothing but the smallest of things, those glances that should have meant nothing, the kind that could be brushed off as casual, accidental, polite. But something lingered in those eyes that made time stop, even for just a breath. It wasn't love then, not even desire in its full form, but something subtle, like the first spark of a match before the flame takes hold. The house was always full of movement, noise, and familiar voices, yet somehow the silence between two people became louder than everything else. He was always there, polite, respectful, speaking with the ease of youth, carrying that effortless energy that belongs to someone who hasn't yet been bent by the weight of the world. Yet every so often, when his gaze met mine, there was something more. He held it too long, or maybe I did. Maybe both, and it was in that hesitation where the air seemed to shift. It was the smallest gestures that began to betray what was being felt. The way his hand brushed against mine when passing a plate across the table. The way his laughter softened when directed toward me, carrying a warmth that seemed meant for no one else. Even the way he stood a little too close, not intruding but never pulling away, as if some invisible thread had already tied us together. The pull was quiet, but it was there. Every moment became a battle of pretending not to notice the way my chest tightened when his presence filled a room, pretending that the heart didn't race at the sound of his voice, low and close, speaking about the simplest things, pretending that the world hadn't suddenly become more vivid just because he was in it. That silence between us was both a shield and a confession, saying everything that lips dared not speak. The danger of it made the attraction heavier. The mind whispered warnings, shouted reasons, listed boundaries, but the body and soul heard none of it. They only listened to that quiet hum, the pull that grew stronger each time the eyes met again and held for just a fraction too long. Every second of contact, every touch, no matter how innocent it appeared, carried a secret weight. It would have been easier if he looked away quickly, if he let it pass like any other fleeting moment. But he didn't, he lingered, and in his lingering, something dangerous but beautiful was born. It wasn't loud, it wasn't rushed, it was patient. It grew like vines in the dark, weaving around the edges of daily life until suddenly it was everywhere. I began to notice the smallest things about him, the details no one else would think twice about, the way his hand curled when he spoke, as if painting pictures in the air, the way his eyes softened when he listened, like he was holding every word close. The scent he left behind, faint but unforgettable, as if it clung to the very air. All of it etched itself into memory without permission, and in return, I began to feel his awareness of me. He noticed when I entered a room, even if he didn't turn his head. He shifted his body to face me, even if others were around. He laughed more easily when I was near, and when he grew quiet, his silence felt full rather than empty. There was no need for words because the silence itself was speaking. It was dangerous, this quiet attraction. Every boundary was clear, every reason to step back was obvious, but hearts rarely bend to reason. Hearts are drawn to what they cannot resist, even if it's hidden behind walls of caution. That's what made it so impossible to ignore. The very fact that it shouldn't have been felt only made it stronger, like a fire denied oxygen that somehow burns hotter. Nights became the hardest. When the world grew still, when there was no distraction, thoughts drifted back to the way his eyes seemed to search for mine, to the way a touch could feel like a confession, to the way silence had become more intoxicating than words. In the darkness, the imagination filled the gaps reality couldn't yet bridge, and the longing became unbearable. And yet, in all of it, there was tenderness. It wasn't only about the heat of attraction, though that was undeniable. It was also about the way it felt safe, as if he saw something long hidden away. It was about the way my soul felt less invisible under his gaze, the way his presence reminded me of everything I thought had been lost to time. It wasn't just desire, it was recognition, a recognition that felt both terrifying and beautiful. Every part of me knew the risk, but every part of me also knew that something had been awakened that could no longer be put back to sleep. It was a pull written in silence, carved into glances, etched into every stolen moment. It grew without asking, without permission, weaving itself into the heart until it became impossible to untangle. It was forbidden, yes, but it was real. It happened on a night that was never supposed to mean anything, just another evening, another ordinary stretch of hours filled with familiar sounds, the quiet hum of a house, the settling of shadows against the walls. But some nights arrive quietly, and yet hold the power to change everything. That was the night when the restraint I had held so tightly for so long finally gave way. The room was warm, but the air felt heavy, as though it knew what was about to unfold. He was there, close but not too close, speaking in that calm voice that always seemed to soften the sharp edges of thought. There had always been something in the way he looked at me, something unspoken, a truth that lingered behind his eyes. But that night it was different. He didn't look away. He let it all stay there, open and raw, as though he was daring me to see it fully. For so long I had buried pieces of myself, convinced they no longer had a place in the world. The longing, the ache, the desire to be touched not just in body, but in soul, all of it locked away beneath layers of silence. But the way his eyes searched mine made the walls crumble without effort. It wasn't lust alone. It was honesty, the kind of honesty that leaves no room for pretense. When he stepped closer, the air seemed to vanish. The distance I had always kept, the invisible line I had drawn, dissolved as though it had never been there. And when his arms finally wrapped around me, the weight of years broke. It was not just an embrace, it was a release. The warmth of his body pressed against mine carried something I had been starved of: safety, tenderness, and the quiet promise that I wasn't as forgotten as I had believed. His touch was not rushed, not demanding. It was reverent. His hands moved as if afraid to break me, but the truth was that I was already breaking, and it was the sweetest kind of surrender. Each brush of his skin against mine reminded me that I was alive, that I could still feel in ways I had almost convinced myself were gone forever. The silence of that night carried more than words ever could. His breath was warm against my skin, steady yet heavy, filled with a hunger he had been holding back just as much as I had. There was no need for confession. Everything was said in the way his fingers lingered, in the way his lips hovered close enough to make my heart tremble, but not enough to steal my breath until I gave it freely. When our lips finally met, it wasn't fire at first. It was something slower, deeper, a trembling that rose from the very core and spread outward like a tide that could not be stopped. And then, as if a dam had burst, it became more fierce, consuming, yet still tender. It was both the ache of years denied and the sweetness of finally being seen. Every barrier I had built fell away. The guilt, the fear, the endless reasoning, none of it survived the honesty in his touch. His eyes stayed on me even in the shadows, as if searching for permission, as if telling me I was free to step into this truth. And when I did, it felt like coming home to a place I had never known but always longed for. The night unfolded in a rhythm that felt both timeless and fleeting, each kiss deeper than the last, each touch carving something new into my memory. It wasn't the hurried passion of youth, but something far more powerful, the passion of souls that had been waiting, of hearts that had endured silence too long. Every sigh, every gasp, every whispered sound was a confession, a truth too heavy to hold back any longer. He held me as though the world beyond that room didn't exist, as though every judgment, every boundary, every unspoken rule had no place here, and in his arms none of it did. All that remained was the simple reality of two bodies, two hearts, colliding in a way that felt destined. There was a gentleness in the way he touched me, but beneath it a strength that undid me completely. His hands didn't just roam, they reassured. His lips didn't just claim, they worshipped. In every movement, there was a reverence that made me feel both cherished and consumed. I had forgotten what it was to be held like that, as though nothing else mattered. The night felt endless, yet it passed too quickly. Hours slipped away unnoticed, measured only by the rising and falling of breath, the softness of skin against skin, the trembling of hearts rediscovering what it meant to be alive. And when it was over, when the world outside began to stir again, nothing inside me was the same. Restraint had been shattered, loneliness had been undone. What began in silence had turned into something undeniable. It wasn't just passion, though passion had burned through every moment. It was the breaking of years, the release of everything I had held back, the awakening of a love that no longer cared about boundaries. That single night changed everything, because in his arms, I remembered not just what it felt like to be touched, but what it felt like to be truly alive. It began like a flame that had been waiting in silence for too long, flickering quietly until the moment came when nothing could hold it back anymore. The first kiss had already broken the dam, but what followed was something far deeper than lips meeting. It was a current pulling me under, one I didn't want to fight. There was no rushing, no careless frenzy, only the slow unfolding of something that felt both forbidden and inevitable. Every second seemed to say, "We have waited too long for this." His hands explored with a patience that made my skin ache, not grasping but learning, not taking but giving. Each touch felt like a revelation, as though he was uncovering a part of me that I had hidden even from myself. My body answered him without hesitation, as though it had known this moment long before my mind would admit it. The way his fingers lingered, the way his lips traced my skin, it was not just desire, it was devotion. There was heat, yes, undeniable and fierce, but beneath the heat was something richer, something that made every movement feel sacred. Each kiss seemed to carry weight, as though it wasn't just passion but a vow, wordless yet binding. His mouth pressed against mine with a hunger that stole my breath, yet it was never rough, never careless. It was a hunger that cherished, that promised I was not just wanted but treasured. Time dissolved. I lost the sense of hours, lost the edges of thought, lost everything but the rhythm of his body against mine and the sound of his breathing mixing with my own. Every sigh, every gasp, every trembling exhale became part of a language only the two of us understood. And in that language, everything was said: longing, fear, release, devotion, the sweetness of surrender, and the fire of awakening. The more he touched me, the deeper something stirred within, something I had believed was long buried. Desire, yes, but not the shallow spark of fleeting attraction. This was desire that burned from the very marrow, the kind that doesn't fade but consumes and transforms. It was sin in the eyes of the world, perhaps, but it felt like salvation in the soul. For the first time in years, I felt not only alive but reborn, as if my very skin had been waiting for this fire to return. Every movement between us grew in intensity but never lost tenderness. The passion flowed naturally, not forced, not rushed. It unfolded like music's, oft notes rising into crescendos, then falling into quiet moments where all that could be heard was breath and heartbeat. And in those softer moments, when his lips brushed my cheek or his forehead rested against mine, I felt something even deeper than passion. I felt a love that stripped me bare in ways no touch ever could. The world outside ceased to matter. Rules, roles, the weight of judgment, they dissolved in the glow of his touch. In that room, there was no before and no after, only now. Now, where two souls had finally found what they had been aching for without ever daring to admit it. Now, where every boundary collapsed under the truth of connection too strong to deny. His eyes never stopped speaking. Even when lips met lips, even when desire carried us higher, his gaze stayed locked on me, searching, asking, promising. It was in those eyes that I found the courage to let go completely, to allow the fire to consume, to stop resisting the pull of what had always been there. The passion between us was not the wild storm of something reckless. It was steady, purposeful, like fire meant to warm but never burn. Yet it consumed all the same. It consumed loneliness, consumed restraint, consumed every doubt that once held me back. In its place, it left clarity. The clarity of knowing this was not just desire, not just flesh meeting flesh, but something that reached into the very core. Every kiss tasted of release. Every touch carried the weight of confession. My body trembled not only with hunger, but with the realization that I had been seen, fully and completely. He touched not just my skin, but the places in me that had been cold, untouched, forgotten. And with every stroke, every whisper of his breath, those places came alive again. The night became endless, not because of time but because of depth. Each wave of passion pulled us deeper, yet never left us drowning. It lifted instead, higher and higher, until it felt as though nothing could exist beyond this union. And when it finally settled, when the fire gentled into warmth, there was no emptiness, only fullness. The fullness of knowing desire had not been a fleeting fire, but an awakening that could never be undone. What we shared that night was more than forbidden passion. It was the kind of connection that feels both like sin and salvation, the kind that heals as much as it burns. And when the quiet returned, when his arms held me close and his breath steadied against my skin, I knew there was no turning back, because once desire awakens, it never sleeps again. At first, it was only meant to be silence, glances exchanged in secret, a touch that lingered too long, the kind of pull both of us pretended not to notice. Every reason to resist was written in bold letters around us: roles, age, judgment, the weight of what others would say. It should have remained nothing more than a passing temptation, the kind of feeling one buries before it ever sees the light of day. But the heart is stubborn, and when it finds truth, no rule, no wall, no fear can bury it for long. What began as forbidden carried the thrill of danger in every stolen moment. There was a heaviness in keeping it locked away, in pretending not to feel the spark that had been lit. Yet every time his eyes found mine, the truth refused to die. It grew quietly, tenderly, becoming stronger with every silence we filled, with every moment we allowed ourselves to simply exist in each other's presence. When that night came, when the barrier of restraint finally broke, everything changed. The secrecy melted into something undeniable. It was no longer about the danger of what should not be, but about the reality of what had always been there. In his arms, judgment lost its voice. In his touch, rules lost their grip. The world outside could not enter the space we created together. Love does not care about the math of age or the labels society gives. Love does not pause to seek permission from the world. It simply rises, carving its place into the soul until no denial is possible. That is what happened between us. What began as something hidden, something I told myself must be pushed away, transformed into a bond that could no longer be questioned. Every time he held me, it wasn't rebellion. It was truth. There was tenderness in everything we shared. He wasn't careless, never reckless with what had begun. His hands carried reverence. His words carried a weight beyond his years. He loved not with the impatience of youth, but with the depth of someone who saw me, all of me, without hesitation. In his presence, I was not a role, not an age, not a shadow of the past. I was simply alive, desired, cherished. And it wasn't only passion, though passion burned fiercely between us. It was the way he listened to every word, the way his eyes held mine, as though they had found their home. It was the laughter that came so easily when we forgot the world, the quiet understanding in the silences when nothing needed to be said. These were not the pieces of a forbidden game. They were the pieces of a love that refused to fit into the boxes life had drawn for us. The judgment of others was always a shadow, a voice whispering what we already knew they would say, but shadows cannot undo the sunlight. No word from outside could erase the way my heart beat differently in his presence, or the way his voice could calm storms inside me that had raged for years. Their rules were made of paper, but what bound us was carved into stone. The tenderness between us grew alongside the fire. Each kiss carried both the ache of desire and the sweetness of devotion. Each touch spoke of passion, yes, but also of care, of a love that went beyond the body into the very soul. There were moments when I wondered how something so condemned by others could feel so pure within me. The answer was always the same. It was because it was real. We learned to live within that truth, even when it meant walking against the current. We did not need the approval of others, because the bond we carried was its own proof. We found joy in the smallest things. His hand finding mine under the table, his smile meeting me across a room, the quiet nights where the world fell away and only we remained. Each moment was a reminder that what we had was not a mistake. It was love stripped bare of rules, and with time, fear softened. The questions grew quiet. What once felt like a forbidden secret became the center of everything. He became the presence I could not imagine life without, not because he filled a role, but because he touched the deepest part of who I am. And I knew, as surely as I knew my own breath, that no judgment, no boundary, no difference the world saw could erase what had been written between us. What began as forbidden transformed into truth, a truth that carried both fire and tenderness, both passion and devotion, a truth that ignored the rules of others and listened only to the voice of the heart. And once that truth was embraced, nothing could ever undo it, because love beyond rules is the only love that endures. If this story touched something inside you, if you felt the pull, the fire, the tenderness of a love that defies rules, then don't let it end here. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to remember what passion and truth feel like, and subscribe to join me in more stories where love awakens, heals, and burns beyond boundaries. Until next time, hold on to the love that sets your soul free.